Hey folks, welcome to week one of DMD 200 Exploring Digital Storytelling. Okay, so this is our first digital online lecture that is under announcements under week one. And so you're going to be getting one of these, as I said before, each and every week, dropping on Saturday morning. So this will give you the entire weekend to absorb and consume this lecture and then get ready for the week and start working on what we need to work on. All right, so let's go over what we're doing in week one. So here on our home page on Canvas, as you know, as we scroll down here, we've got all our weekly modules, right? Each module corresponds with a week of the semester. So we are in week one. We're going to dive right into week one. And then each module simply has a overview sheet just to keep things nice and simple. And then everything we need for the week is inside there. So if I click on the week one overview, you can see that in this lecture, we're going to go briefly over the syllabus. I say briefly because you've probably already taken some time to look at it and you don't need me to read through it verbatim with you. And then we're going to launch into our first batch of topics for the class. We're going to talk about why storytelling in general is important. We're going to talk about some basic story structure, including 3 acts and character arcs. We're going to talk about story types, specifically genres, and a little bit about the concept of impermanence versus documentation. And then on your own, you guys are going to watch a couple of videos, this extremely brief abridged history of storytelling, and the power of storytelling here, which was a TED Talk. Now, just a reminder, there is no textbook in this class or any of my classes, and so all of the read, view, listen content that you see in announcements and modules are meant for you to consume as if it was a textbook. So be sure you do all of that because we will be talking about these things. Speaking of talking, we are going to have some homework that we are going to discuss in class in person on Wednesday. Remember, we are meeting on Wednesdays in person. And so we'll talk about your homework at the end of this. All right, so that's sort of the overview about what we're doing. Let's get rolling. So if we go back to announcements, you'll see that there was an early announcement back in week one, which you may have looked at already. Welcome to the class, which is what we're covering now. And so here, this talks about sort of what the class is about in general. But specifically, I wanted to get down to the what is this class really about section, right? So what we're trying to do in this class, of course, is use digital tools in a way that helps us tell narratives and stories that can be used for a variety of different reasons in a bunch of different industries. But really what the class is all about, sort of its core, as it were, is learning the basic tools and skills of digital storytelling and about storytelling in general. Because storytelling is one of those sort of truly ubiquitous things that lies at the core of humanity. And the example I show here is one of the oldest cave paintings that has ever been discovered. It was found in Spain, and it dates back to about 33,000 BCE, which is a very long time ago, right? Depicts a bison and horses, and this was done in ochre and charcoal, right, which sound like sort of contemporary art tools, but naturally these were just found. They were burnt pieces of wood or flowers or whatnot, and they were used to sort of draw on this cave wall. Now, these artistic representations are accompanied by handprints, right? You can see evidence of handprints around it. So these artifacts show not only the artist, but a storyteller at work, right? Whoever drew this all these many thousands of years ago did a couple of things. They told a visual story about the bison and about some horses, right? Which was something that they observed out in reality. Maybe they were out hunting. And of course the existence of these animals as well as how plentiful they were. There's a ton of them. So what's the story being told here, right? That there's a bunch of bison out there, there's a bunch of horses. And then the interesting thing is that the artist, who probably got their hands all covered with this drawing material they were using, then went ahead and pressed their hand into the cave wall to make a handprint. Now, they could be just trying to get the material off of their hands, or they were simply proving their own existence, almost like an artist would sign a painting. And right there, it's a piece of visual storytelling before the vocabulary for such things even existed. So this need for man to tell visual stories has been around a very long time, and it's embedded into sort of our lizard brains, as it were. So while we're teaching these tools in this class, and we're certainly teaching it in a digital environment because it's a modern sensibility, the underlying foundation of it dates back much further than that. So despite our ability to tell stories practically being embedded in our DNA, many of us are actually not really good at it, right? We all know that one person who can't seem to tell a good joke, right? We all have like a family member or a friend, and they always try to tell a joke, and they just can't quite get the structure of the joke correct or the timing right, and so it's just not funny, right? Our ability to succeed and do well in life, in love and at work, often hinges on our ability to be an engaging person, an interesting person, an articulate person, and to tell a good story. But not everybody's really good at it. So I like to think of storytelling like swimming, right? It's embedded in our DNA. We instinctually know how to do it. But like swimming, babies, of course, know how to swim immediately. You can look up videos of newborn babies just being thrown into pools with their parents, and they know how to swim by instinct. And yet, we all know when we're kids, we then had to go learn how to swim. So how is it that we had to learn something that was embedded in who we were? Well, it's because we learn about fear. And specifically in the case of swimming, of course, you learn about the fear of drowning, right? It kicks in as we get older, and then we have to learn how to swim all over again. Well, similarly, toddlers love to tell big, colorful stories, right? Sit down with any 2 or 3-year-old and they will tell you the most amazing stories about things that have happened to them that day. But then as they get older, they start to have this fear of looking foolish, right? Oh, I don't want to be the center of attention, or I don't want to tell the story badly, or people are laughing at me, not with me. And we've all gone through this. And so this class, think of this class specifically of learning how to tell stories fearlessly all over again. You already know how to do it. It's in you. It's there. We're just going to tap into it and use those skills that are built into you as a person. And we're going to do so in a digital environment. Okay, so that's sort of the main thrust of what's happening with the class in terms of what storytelling is about. And if storytelling is a broad term and it's used in a variety of different ways, so I just wanted to clarify what it means in this particular class. Now, storytelling, of course, is at the heart of a lot of things you might do professionally. Everything from branding and identity, to writing for the web, to writing in general for that matter, to communication endeavors. If you're in sports media, you're always telling good stories. Storytelling is at the basis of everything from marketing to advertising to sports media to visual design to web design to you name it. And so it's a very important skill to be good at, as well as learning how to use the modern tools to help you do that. Okay, so let's talk about some of the basics of storytelling that are really independent of how you are employing your storytelling, whether it's digital or just sitting around telling a story. There are some basic story structure elements. So we're going to take a look first at the typical three-act story. So we're going to talk about 4 different types of character arc and sort of how it breaks down, right? And so the character arcs usually start with 2 main characters. There's a protagonist, which is our hero, right? And then the antagonist, who is not necessarily the villain, but could well be in opposition to the protagonist. They're trying to obtain the opposite thing the protagonist wants, or trying to stop the protagonist from getting what they want, right? So that's sort of your basic 2 main characters. Now, of course, stories have many more than 2 characters, but there can be groups of people or multiple people who fall into either of these categories. So undergoing a character arc is sort of broken down into a bunch of different ways. Now, the protagonist, of course, is the lead character or one of the major characters in the story, whether we're talking fiction or nonfiction. These things are true of real life as well. The antagonist, as we said, actively opposes or is even hostile towards the protagonist, and therefore they can be their antithesis or a straight-up villain. And of course, if you want to write and create a decent story, learning about character arcs will help you achieve the emotional heft that you need to make a more memorable impact on your audience. We all want to follow the characters through the journey. And when I say follow, I mean that we want to feel as though we're part of the journey. You generally detach from stories, whether you're reading them or watching them on television or in a movie, if you don't feel connected to the characters. And so understanding how the arc works helps your audience connect with the characters. It doesn't have to be a big, elaborate story. It could be the simplest story ever. Character gets up in the morning, has to go to the store to buy a loaf of bread, and comes home. But meanwhile, as they go there, there's a dog in the neighborhood who keeps barking at them, and they're afraid to keep walking up the street. And so therefore they think they might not get the bread. Super simple story, nothing that interesting, but it sets up a simple character arc. How does he get around the dog? How does this character overcome her fear? Does she end up getting the bread? So being invested in those things helps you with your story. Okay, so let's talk about the 4 types of character arcs. Now, these are basic types. Of course, they can become more complex than this, and these 4 can interact with each other, but we're going to start with the first one. Now, this is probably the one that a lot of people are really familiar with. It falls under the title of transformation, but it's often called the hero's journey. Now, my example here, of course, is Luke Skywalker, who you're probably all familiar with. Now, the hero's journey, or a transformation arc, is extremely common. We've seen it 1,000 times in literature and movies and whatnot. So it's a very old character arc. And so the hero's journey often uses, magical transformation to have the protagonist undergo a significant change of their personality. Not just the way they look at the world, but the way they act, how they feel about things, what's important to them. It completely changes them as a person. Now, the reason why it's referred to as a magical transformation is because we know that in real life, sure, people change, but it usually takes a very long time for us to change as human beings, not usually in the course of a 500-page novel or a 2-hour movie. So the magical part comes in that it happens pretty quickly in the term of the story, but you get the idea. So this is often due to some hidden strength or talent or qualities that maybe our hero had, but they didn't know about, or they didn't believe in themselves, or somebody had to come along and show it to them, which is really the story of Luke Skywalker, right? If it wasn't for Obi-Wan Kenobi coming along and telling him that he was special, he would still be on the farm, trying to farm liquid, I guess, is what they were doing. Okay, so moving on. So that's the first story arc. Now, the second story arc falls into the category of maturity. Now, the maturity arc is similar in that, of course, the main character changes. This happens in all arcs, but in this case, the major change happening to our character, to our protagonist, is because of personal growth in the face of external factors, as opposed to a radical transformative change that comes from inner qualities that they previously had. In this case, our example is Tony Stark, right? If you remember at the beginning of the Iron Man movie, he was not a very nice guy. He was selfish and self-centered and sarcastic, and didn't really care about anything other than making money. And so, unlike Luke Skywalker, it wasn't like there was a hero underneath all of it. He had to find that in himself by becoming a more mature person. And what kicked off his journey of maturity is what he found out about himself and his weapons and whatnot. And so ultimately, of course, they become a better person. So by addressing their personal faults or their hang-ups, a protagonist in a maturity arc will not tend to evolve into a significantly different character. They still remain roughly the same, but now they realize that they have to sort of change what they're doing with themselves. So, of course, in later Marvel movies, Tony Stark is still a wise guy. He's still sarcastic. He's still the smartest guy in the room. But now, of course, he's not selfish, and he is doing things for the betterment of everybody else. So he hasn't changed too much, but what his goals have. Okay, next, alteration. Now, over here, we have the gal from Frozen. And so an alteration arc is perhaps probably the more subtle arc, right? And similar to the maturity arc, in the sense that it focuses on telling a story where a protagonist undergoes only a modest shift of their attitude by the end of the story. But the alteration arc is somewhat different in that it is more about a character changing their point of view than it is about making a big change in their behavior. And so it's much more subtle. It's similar to the maturity arc, but they are even more so pretty much the same person, but they now have a different perspective on something. Okay, so that's the alteration arc. And then lastly is the decline arc. Now, some people really love the decline arc because this is where the character, unlike the previous three examples where the characters are not the best versions of themselves at the beginning of the story, and then they become better people, in the decline arc, our main character starts out as a pretty good person, and then they go downhill. Decline arc does exactly what it says, right? It follows a character who is probably not perfect at the beginning, but is generally a good person. And then they start making bad decisions or poor choices, and ultimately it dooms their character and sends them on a really interesting story. You can probably think of lots of stories like this. This is Eve from Killing Eve, which is a story about an MI6 agent who sort of becomes obsessed with a serial killer. And I won't tell you the rest because I don't want to ruin the story. But let's just say things go badly for her. So in this case, the decline arc can take on a more transgressive or pessimistic flavor than the other tales, because we're not so much building a hero in the decline arc, you're tearing down a possible hero. But those also make for super interesting stories. Now, as you can probably imagine, and you can probably think of some examples, a lot of times our protagonist or a group of protagonists will be a combination of these different arcs. It might be a little of each. They are sometimes just one version, but sometimes it's sort of a mashup of them. So they're not mutually exclusive to each other. And even though this is called a character arc, you should note that character arcs aren't always shaped like an arc, meaning that the journey is not always an up and down journey. If you look at this graphic here of Woody from Toy Story, you'll note that the horizontal line in the middle represents sort of an even keel, right? He's neither really active on the uphill, as it were, nor is he on the downhill. His life is just fine. He's satisfied. He's comfortable. So here he is here, just leaning against the wall, and he looks pretty cool. But then as time goes on and you follow his arc upwards, now he's getting nervous, and then a lot of action is happening, and then something bad has happened, and his story goes below the line, and now he is falling downwards. And here he is at his lowest point, but he's having a really bad week. A lot of terrible things have happened to him. But then he, gets the resolve to pick himself back up and starts to climb up above his median line and is doing much better. And now you'll see that his energy level is much higher, but instead of it being an energy level based on action and things that are against him, he has now succeeded and has done well, and he comes back down again to his resting point. But you'll notice that his resting point at the end of this story is just a little bit higher than his resting point at the beginning. So he's improved incrementally through the story. Okay, so that is character arcs. And the next thing we want to talk about is genres. Let's take a look at genres. We'll get back to 3 arcs in a minute. Now, all stories can be categorized by different sorts of genre, right? Now, a genre is basically just a kind of story or a category of story. Popular film genres include action, adventure, crime, drama, comedy, horror, and so on, right? Television has similar genres to movies, but they also have other genres that you don't really see in movies, things like soap operas or news shows or talk shows or reality television, right? These are things that are germane just to television. Now, in the world of visual art or design, genre can describe the subject matter of graphic design, painting, sculpture, photography, glass blowing, whatever. All of those can be considered genres or categories of visual art or design. Now, a subgenre, of course, falls underneath the main genre. So a subgenre is then used to sort of more further define the genre. It drills it down a little deeper. It fine-tunes it or focuses it. So, for example, a subgenre in film, television, and even comic books can include action-adventure comedies, right? We've all seen movies or read comics that are both action, adventure, and funny in their comedies, right? So that is a bunch of subgenres sort of glued together. There are romantic adventures, buddy comedies, film noir, and of course many, many more. So you can mash up genres a bunch of different ways. Now, if we're talking about graphic design, a subgenre of graphic design could be poster design or book cover design. package design, identity systems, web design, or typography. These are specific areas of design that help to sort of further narrow down what it is that is being designed. If we're talking about fine art like painting, a subgenre of that could be still life or landscape. There are various art movements that have happened over the years, such as Impressionism, like Claude Monet's work, or Post-Impressionism, Cubism, Dadaism, Abstract Expressionism. So all of these are subgenres of the larger genre of painting. Now, the third category is theme. Now, theme narrows it down even more. So a genre is kind of a wide definition. A subgenre helps to narrow it down a little bit further. And then a theme narrows it down even more. So picture like a funnel, right? So we start out wide, and then it gets more narrow, and then more narrow. And what this does is it creates an area of focus for the story. So now, themes, of course, can speak to a conversation or a discourse, a discussion between the creator of the story and the audience. So in film and television, common themes can be about redemption, resurrection, not necessarily literal resurrection, but it could be. Could be metaphorical resurrection. The prodigal son, right? And again, it doesn't have to be a son specifically, but it can be about somebody who has gone bad and then comes back to their family or their group. Transformation, vengeance, innocence, justice, and so on and so forth. Those are all different themes. Now, any of those themes could be applied to different genres and subgenres above. Now, in graphic design, right, so graphic design is our genre, a poster design is your subgenre, but then you can have themes of posters that fall under that. You could design a poster just for a museum, or for a film, or for a protest. All of those are different themes. They're all still posters, and they're all still graphic design. So that just narrows it down even further. However, there can be more general themes in graphic design, like package design or editorial design. And of course, a single piece of art or content can mash up all sorts of different genres, subgenres, and themes. Just like our character arcs of our protagonist can be a mashup of those different types of character arcs, genres, subgenres, and themes can all sort of be interconnected and mash each other up. So what we're going to try to do in our stories that we're going to create in our class here is we're going to be cognizant of and make some decisions about what genre are we working in, what is our subgenre, and do we have some themes. We don't want to just make stories, we want to understand what their point is and where they're heading. So we will be referring back to both character arcs and back to genres, subgenres, and themes for all of our projects in this class. And we're going to go over the syllabus in a minute, and we'll see exactly what the projects are. But for now, just sort of keep these ideas floating in your head. Now, of course, back here in the Week 1 overview module, notice that all of these are linked. So you can download the 3-act handout easily just by clicking on this, and it will download it to your computer just like it did here. And we're going to take a look at that next. You can download the character arc handout and so on and so forth. So all these links will take you to the actual documents that I am showing you right now. So not only can you replay this video if you want, but you can download all these documents yourself and view them. Okay, let's take a look at the 3-act structure. We'll come back here to the basic story structure. Now, the 3-act structure is about the entire story, right? So character arcs are just about the protagonist and the antagonist and the main characters. The genre and the subgenre and the theme is about defining what kind of story it is. Now, the 3-act structure, this is instead about the actual way the story is built. Its structure, that's why it's a 3-act structure. And it's not a coincidence that this particular graphic is drawn like a roller coaster, right? You've all probably been on roller coasters at one point or another, or at least seen them. You get the idea of a roller coaster, right? It starts out slowly and then gets busier and busier and then gets really exciting at a certain point, and then goes from there. So if we keep the metaphor of the roller coaster in mind, and you'll see that it's broken down into 3 major arcs. Now, pretty much every story has a 3-act structure at its base. That doesn't mean that every story is exactly a 3-act structure, but it does make a good foundation. Excuse me. Just like houses, of course, are all built with some kind of a foundation, usually made from concrete, and then there's a wood structure on top of that. Now, what the house looks like can be vastly different from house to house, but they have those basic points. And so all stories, no matter how they're made, have a basic 3-act structure. So you'll see here that the beginning of the first act is about exposition. Exposition is simply sharing important information with the audience. The who, what, where, when, and why of the story. Where are we? What's our location? Who are our characters? And what's the basic thing that's going on at the beginning of the story? And then that's sort of the status quo for our characters. We assume, as the audience, that that's just how life has been going for them for a while, right? And now you just get to see part of their story, either by opening up the novel or sitting down to watch the movie or whatever. And then towards the end of the first act, something happens that changes their status quo. It can be a good thing, could be a bad thing, could be a funny thing, could be a serious thing, but something happens that sends your characters on some kind of a journey. And then that brings us into the second act, and then which is towards the middle of the story. And then a lot of things can happen in the middle of the story. Maybe they gain more information. Maybe they go on an actual journey. Maybe they meet new characters. Maybe something good or bad happens to them, where they have to continue on with the story. They can't just turn around and go back to the beginning of the story. There's something in the story that makes them have to go on. And then, of course, there is the big rising action, which is easy to understand if you're thinking about sort of an action movie, but this can happen in all sorts of different kinds of movies. It doesn't have to be very bombastic action. It can just be any sort of action. And then as we move into Act 3, there's a giant climax, which of course is where things resolve themselves and come to a big conclusion. And then the end of the story kind of wraps things up and brings the characters back down to a new starting point. Now, presumably, you can then tack on another 3 acts after this and start a new story. That's sort of how sequels work, right? So that's the 3-act structure. So between the 3-act structure and the genres, subgenres, and themes, and of course the character arc, if you read through these documents and try to wrap your head around these basic concepts, you pretty much have the 3 major building blocks to creating any kind of story. Now, again, as I said, we are going to revisit all of these for all of our projects. So try to digest these as much as you can and just sort of have them floating around in your head, because we're going to keep referring back to them, okay? This is going to be our vocabulary for making stories now. Okay, now, briefly, let's shift gears. We're going to take a look at the syllabus. Again, you can review the syllabus by simply clicking this link. But we're going to take a look at the PDF of it here. Okay, now, most of the syllabus information on the handout is also on our home page of our Canvas page. So I'm not going to go over this verbatim because it's redundant, and let's not waste too much time here, right? But just so you know, this is the basic breakdown of the class. Everything is there. The class is broken down. This is the part I want to get to, is grading and assessment method, because this is not on our home page. Now, you will see this over in our assignments section on Canvas, but I wanted to go over it here. So for this class, we have 3 categories of assignments. We have what's called yes ands, which is worth 15% of your grade. We'll get more into yes ands later, but you can read the basic description of it here, right? It's an improv technique, which is more nuanced version of telephone. If you ever played a telephone game when you were a kid, you know what I'm talking about. Where all players have the same information, but tell the story to each other in an ever-expanding system of pieces. Emphasis is on active listening and the use of language and voice. Now, sometimes we might do these in person in class on Wednesdays, and sometimes we might do these virtually using the discussion board on Canvas. But either way, they'll work the same way, and you'll see they pop up on the schedule as we go along. Next, micro stories. You guys are going to be writing some very short stories, and there are 3 of them, just as there are 3 yes ands. And those are also worth, these are worth 20% of your grade. Now, these are shorter than short stories. They're really tiny. They're basically 1 page of writing. I find micro stories to be super helpful to get ideas on paper in a written environment with 0 pressure, right? If I told you had to write a short story that was 5 to 10 pages long, that might make you nervous. If I told you had to write a 20-page story, that'd make you more nervous. But we're talking a page. It's like 500 words. So this is just practice stories for us to be able to work on our writing a little bit, because writing, of course, plays into pretty much all types of storytelling. Whether you're designing a website or making a movie, it all starts out with writing. So we do a little bit of writing in this class. And don't worry, there are writing prompts that get you started. Nobody has to start with a blank slate. And we'll see how those work going along. So they're actually quite a lot of fun. Now, there are 4 major projects in this class that grand total are worth 60%, right? Now, these storytelling projects, these serve as our principal means through which you will demonstrate what you are learning in class. Each project has their own set of requirements, but it breaks down into 4 different types of stories. So we're going to skip down here to the list of projects, and you'll see that Project 1 is a visual story, right? Project 2 is an audio story, so you're going to be working with sound. Project 3 is a photo story. You're going to be taking photographs and turning those into a story. And then Project 4 is a video story. You're going to be shooting some video. Now, we do not need fancy equipment for this class. The beautiful thing is that you have any kind of phone, any kind of modern phone. You can do all of these using your phone. You can design things using apps on your phone. You can use your own software. You can use a variety of free software, which we're going to go over in class next week. You can obviously record audio on your phone. You can shoot photos on your phone, and you can record video. So we don't need a bunch of equipment. So we're keeping it light in terms of equipment and software. We'll get more into that next week. But when you look at this list, I don't want you to start thinking, oh boy, I got to get all this extra stuff. No, you do not. You don't have to spend a dime in this class. We have everything we need. So again, you're making a visual story, an audio story, a photo story, and a video story. Now, you might notice that the due dates all are the same. Each one has a due date of week 6, week 9, week 12, and week 15. What does that mean? Are we doing each one 4 times? No, we are not. What it means is, you'll notice down here, it says projects 1, 2, 3, and 4 can be completed in any order that you want, but are due at the listed due dates. You have 3 weeks to complete each project. So when you look through the syllabus and see the week to week, you'll notice you have 3 weeks to build each project. 3 times 4 is 12. We're spending 12 weeks of this class on building these projects. So you might decide for week 6, which is your first deadline, you might think, you know what, I'm going to make an audio story. I always wanted to make an audio story. I'm going to make an audio story. And then for week 9, which is our second deadline, you might say, I'm going to do a video story. And then so on and so forth. Meanwhile, a different student might start out with the visual story and then jump to the photo story. At the end of the class, at the end of the semester, you will have all 4 done. But each student gets to pick which order they want to do them in. Now, the reason we do this in this particular class is because I want to get a variety of different stories showing up every due date. So week 6, week 9, week 12, and week 15, we get a variety, and it keeps everybody interested, and we get to share our work with each other. And if you haven't done a particular style of story yet, and you see somebody else's story that week, that might inspire you, get you in the mood to do it. And of course, we come to this class with certain skill sets already in place. You might be really good at taking photos, but maybe you've never done anything with audio. So maybe you want a little extra time to practice with audio and get ready for it. So you don't have to do that one first if you don't want to. So you can do these in any order you want. And we'll talk more about this in person on Wednesday. Okay? And there's some more details here about when things are due. Be sure to read through these. Okay? Okay, attendance and class participation, of course, is also part of your grade. There is an attendance and class participation policy. You can find it on our homepage. We do not have traditional attendance in this class because we are a hybrid class, so be sure to read through that so you understand what it means. Okay, free swim days. Now, I build into a bunch of my classes free swim days, which means that occasionally we might have a day during a certain week where we don't have anything structured to do. It's just free time for you to work on your projects. Because if we're going to be building 4 projects plus doing yes ands and micro stories, you need some time to work on the stuff without me giving you new stuff to do. So we have free swim days. So those will pop up in the syllabus too. So consider that like studio time, as it were, where you can just get your stuff done. I build those into class, not only so I don't overwhelm you with too much stuff all at once, but so that you can hit your deadlines, because deadlines are important. Okay, next, Course materials, be sure to read through this. It's on our homepage and it's on the syllabus. Again, there's no textbook, but you do need some other stuff. We don't use super fancy software in this class. We use readily available Office and Creative software that you can find in a lot of places. If you have a Macintosh computer, then it already comes loaded, or you can download for free iMovie, GarageBand. So those are great. And if you don't have a Mac, if you have a PC, there are PC versions of similar software, which we're going to go over next week. You can use Adobe Spark, which is free and available online, SoundCloud, Medium, and YouTube, which of course are also online tools and services. So in a way, as long as you have a halfway decent computer, you're fine. You don't have to use anything fancy in this class. Okay, storage. Make sure you get some file storage, either portable hard drives or cloud storage. Every student has access to OneDrive through your Office 365 email, so take advantage of that. You have a bunch of gigabytes of space, and of course you could also have other online storage such as Dropbox or Apple's iCloud or whatever you want to use. You should have some kind of sketchbook, drawing paper, pencils, pens, or markers for quick sketching of ideas or doodling ideas or writing out things. Okay. Again, we talked about no textbook, but we do have weekly consumables, I like to call them, which could be everything from a video to a reading to a podcast. Doesn't matter. It could be a bunch of different things, and they will pop up in the modules or the announcements. And make sure you consume those, take notes on them, because we will talk about them, and or you will be using those things in your projects. Okay. These are all the course policies. I'm not going to go through them here. You can find all of them on our homepage on Canvas. So be sure to read through them right here. Course policies. We have links to every single one of them. Read through those at your leisure if you haven't already. Maybe you have, which is great. And then, of course, we get to the week to week. Now, this is where the real meat and potatoes is. Now, in the syllabus, each one of these weekly rectangles corresponds with a module. So you're going to find the exact same information on the syllabus, labeled week 1, week 2, whatever, as you're going to find in the modules labeled week 1, week 2, whatever. I tried to be as consistent and redundant as possible so you can find everything in multiple places. Okay? So I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but you go through it just so you can sort of see the trajectory of what we're doing from week to week, when things are due, and I put the dates for this particular semester here so you can match them up with your actual calendar. Okay. Okay, last but not least, before I let you go, back to Module 1, you do have some homework. So two bits of homework. Number 1, you got to watch a couple of videos. Like I said, here under Read, View, and Listen, you're going to find these links that take you out to YouTube. This one here, The Extremely Brief Abridged History of Storytelling, and this one here, The Power of Storytelling. This one and this one. Please go watch those on your own. They're a lot of fun. They're very informative. Last bit of homework is you are going to prepare, and when I say prepare, you can write this down, jot it down on your phone, whatever you want to do, a very brief 1-minute story about yourself that we're going to present to the class on Wednesday when we meet in person. Now, it can be about anything, an interesting story, something about your family, something that happened to you over the summer, something fun, something serious, it doesn't matter. Whatever you want to tell us. Now, I know it's tough to get up in front of class and tell a little bit of a story, but we're all going to do it. I'm even going to do it. So you will be fine. Just something short, brief, and whatever you find interesting. We're not going to judge you. We just want to get to know you a little bit. So a brief 1-minute story, have that ready to rock and roll for Wednesday. Okay, so that is everything for this week. Be sure to get all this stuff read through and consumed between now and when we meet on Wednesday. Wednesday, we'll pick up the ball in person with our 1-minute stories, and then we might go back and review a couple of other things, as well as answer your questions and do what we have to do from there. All right, can't wait to see you guys in person, and I'm glad we're starting off the semester together, and I will see you soon.